All right, ready for another deep dive? This time we're tackling something everyone deals with, bringing a new team member on board. And you know what that means, right? Getting them set up on Microsoft 365.
Oh yeah, the joys of user management.
But don't worry, we've got a great guide to help us out.
There's a guide for everything these days.
True, but this one's pretty solid. It's from blog.m365pros.com called How to Add a User to Your Microsoft 365 Subscription. It's from November 25th of this year, so pretty recent.
Up-to-date info, always a good thing.
Absolutely. Now, adding users might not sound like the most exciting topic,
Not exactly a thriller, no.
but trust me, there are some interesting tidbits in here. Plus, mastering this process will make you the office hero when that new hire starts.
I can see the headlines now. Local admin saves the day. New hire access granted.
Okay, maybe not headlines, but definitely a smoother onboarding experience. So let's dive in. First things first, we need to get into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center.
Ah, the admin center. Every admin's best friend and occasional headache.
Okay, maybe a little of both. But for those who haven't spent much time in there, how would you describe it?
It's like mission control for all your user management needs. Adding, deleting, assigning licenses, the whole shebang.
Got it. The central hub for all things user-related. So the guide mentions an add a user wizard, which seems pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, Microsoft has definitely tried to simplify things. The wizard walks you through each step, kind of like a friendly guide through the process.
No more getting lost in a sea of menus then.
Hopefully not.
All right, so we're in the wizard. What's next?
Well, now it's time to fill in the blanks about our new user.
The usual suspects?
Yep, first and last name, display name, and of course that all-important username. You know, the one for their email address.
Pretty straightforward, but I guess accuracy is key here.
Oh, absolutely. It's how they'll be identified in the system and by everyone else, too.
Consistency is king, or queen in this case. All right, so we've got their basic info down. Now for the password conundrum. Should we let the system auto-generate a secure one or come up with something memorable?
Password 123 is probably not the best choice. Security first.
Definitely, especially for a brand new account. So a system-generated password is the way to go.
Yeah, that's the safest bet. Those things are usually a random jumble of characters. But whatever you choose, make sure to send those login details securely to the new user. Maybe their personal email address is best.
Makes sense. Can't start the first day locked out.
Absolutely not.
All right, password's taken care of. What's next on our user creation checklist?
Well, now comes the part that can sometimes be tricky. Licenses.
Yes, those magical keys to the Microsoft 365 kingdom. What happens if we're all out?
No need to panic. The guide walks you through buying a new license right there in the admin center. Just a few clicks and boom, you're good to go.
Wow, seamless. It's like they thought of everything.
They try to.
All right, so we've got the account set up, the license is sorted. But what about those all-important roles and permissions? This is where we decide if our new user gets the keys to the castle or just a guest pass, right?
You got it. It's time to play a little benevolent ruler.
And the guide gives us some pointers on this.
Absolutely. It stresses picking roles based on what the new user will be doing. You know, what are their responsibilities? You can choose from preset roles or even make your own with specific permissions.
Okay, so we need to find that balance between giving them access to the tools they need and not giving them access to everything.
Right. Security and functionality, always a balancing act.
Now, the guide mentions this global administrator role. Sounds pretty powerful.
Oh, yeah, that's the big one. Global admins can manage pretty much everything, from user accounts to licenses, even organizational policies.
Wow, that's a lot of power.
You don't want to hand that out to just anyone.
Definitely not. Who usually gets that role then?
It's usually reserved for IT pros or, higher-ups who really need that level of control.
Makes sense. So what about everyone else? Are there preset roles for different jobs?
There are. Microsoft 365 has a bunch of preset roles for specific tasks, like there's Exchange Administrator for managing email, SharePoint Administrator for sites and documents, and a Teams Administrator for, you guessed it, managing teams.
So we can choose roles based on the tools and services a user needs to access.
Exactly. And here's a fun fact. You can even make custom roles. Like if you've got a unique role in your organization that doesn't fit into any of the presets, you can create one just for them.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So much flexibility. But are there any common mistakes people make with permissions?
Oh, yeah. The biggest one I see is people just giving everyone access to everything because it's easier.
But that's got to be a security nightmare.
It is, and it can make troubleshooting a real pain if something goes wrong.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, giving access to what's needed, but keeping things secure and organized.
Exactly. And remember, you can always adjust permissions later if you need to. It's better to start a little more restrictive and then grant more access as you go.
I like that approach. Start small and scale up as needed. Now, the guide emphasizes something that I think we all need to be reminded of sometimes. Review everything before you hit that final Create User button.
Oh, yeah. It's so easy to rush through things and miss a typo or something.
Exactly. And a little mistake now could cause big headaches later.
Definitely worth taking a moment to double-check everything.
All right, we've talked about licenses and roles. What else is important to keep in mind for a smooth onboarding experience?
So far, we've covered the technical side of things, the foundations, you could say. But there's also the human side of things to consider. How do we make our new teammate feel welcome and ready to go?
Right, because starting a new job can be pretty overwhelming.
Totally. That's where those bonus tips from the guide come in handy. They're all about creating a welcoming and supportive environment.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into those in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so those bonus tips for onboarding. Where do we even begin?
Well, the guide starts with something so basic you might be surprised.
Let me guess. Documentation.
Close. It's all about that welcome email.
A welcome email. Really? I mean, everyone sends those, right? What's so special about it in this context?
It's not just about sending it, it's about what's in it. Think back to your first day at a new job. What would have been helpful?
A guide to the company intranet would have been nice.
Yeah.
Oh, and a cheat sheet for all the acronyms everyone uses.
See? That's what I'm talking about. And don't forget, a personal message from their manager or team lead can make a big difference.
Okay, so it's more than just links and logins. It's about making them feel welcome, part of the team.
Exactly. It sets the tone for their whole experience.
So what kind of content should we pack into this super welcome email?
The guide suggests, like you said, links to key resources. Things like how to set up their profile, access their email, find their way around the apps they'll be using.
It's like a digital orientation package.
You got it. You could even include like a fun fact about the company or a link to a virtual office tour.
Now we're talking.
Make it fun, make it informative.
I like it. Now, earlier, we talked about using templates for user accounts. What about for these welcome emails? Is that a thing?
Oh yeah, the guide mentions that too. Think about it. A pre-written email that you can just tweak for each new person.
That would save so much time.
Especially if you're onboarding people all the time. Consistency is key.
I'm all about working smarter, not harder. Now, what if we're bringing on a whole bunch of new people at once? Any tips for that?
The guide actually talks about a feature for adding multiple users at the same time.
Hold on. So we don't have to go through the process individually for each person?
Nope. You can upload a spreadsheet with all their details, and the system takes care of it.
Now that's efficiency.
Right.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground here, from licenses to roles to welcome emails. It feels like we've got a good handle on the onboarding process now.
I think so. But, there's always more to learn. Microsoft 365 is a beast.
True. But the guide gives us a great starting point.
It does.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. Security. It feels like there's more to the story, especially with all these new user accounts.
You're right. Security is paramount. And while the guide doesn't go into too much detail, it's definitely something to think about.
So what are we missing? What else should we be considering?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is multi-factor authentication.
Multi-factor authentication. That sounds intense.
It's actually pretty straightforward. It's an extra layer of security that requires users to prove it's really them. Like they'll need their password and a code sent to their phone or something.
Oh, I've seen that before.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more common.
So even though the guide doesn't explicitly mention it, it's something we should be looking into as part of our onboarding process.
Absolutely. It's a simple step that can make a big difference in keeping things secure.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into adding users to Microsoft 365. Hopefully everyone listening feels a bit more confident about tackling this process.
And maybe even a little excited to welcome their new teammates.
Right. Doesn't have to be a dreaded task. With a little planning and the right tools, it can be pretty painless.
Painless and even, dare I say, enjoyable.
Okay, maybe not enjoyable, but definitely manageable.
To manageable onboarding.
Cheers to that. And thanks to Everett for joining us on another deep dive. We'll catch you next time. Okay, so let's dig into those bonus tips for making onboarding smoother. I'm all about making those first days less overwhelming, you know?
Oh, absolutely. It's all about creating a welcoming experience, and the guide actually starts with something so simple,
Hit me with it.
a welcome email.
A welcome email. Seriously, I mean, doesn't everyone send those? What's so special about it?
It's not just about sending it, it's about what you put in it. Think back to when you started a new job. What would have been helpful for you to get in that first email?
A guide to the company internet would have been amazing. Oh, and maybe like a cheat sheet for all those acronyms everyone uses. It's like a whole new language sometimes.
Right. You get it. And don't underestimate the power of a personal welcome message from, like, their manager or someone on their team. It makes a difference.
Okay, so it's not just about the technical stuff. It's about making them feel like they belong, part of the team.
Exactly. Sets the tone from day one.
So what kind of content should we be packing into this super-powered welcome email?
Well, like you said, links to key resources are essential. How to set up their profile, how to access their email, how to navigate all those apps they'll be using.
It's like a digital orientation package, in a way.
Perfect way to put it. And you can even spice it up with some fun stuff, too, like a fun fact about the company or a link to a virtual office tour.
I like where you're going with this. Make it fun. Make it informative.
Exactly. Make it memorable.
Now, remember how we talked about using templates for setting up users? Does the guide mention anything about templates for these welcome emails?
Oh, it does. Having a pre-written email that you can tweak for each new hire is a total time saver.
Right. Especially if you're constantly bringing new people on board.
And it helps keep things consistent, too.
I love it. Now, what about when you're onboarding a whole group of new hires at once? Any tips for handling that?
The guide talks about a handy feature for adding multiple users simultaneously.
Wait, so you're telling me we don't have to go through the whole process individually for every single person?
Nope. You can upload a spreadsheet with all their details, and the system handles the rest.
That is amazing. So efficient.
Streamlined onboarding, that's what we like.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from licenses to roles to onboarding emails. I feel like we're ready to tackle this whole user management thing.
I think we've got a good grasp of the essentials.
Now, before we wrap things up completely, I want to touch on something we mentioned earlier, security. I feel like there's always more to learn about keeping things safe, especially with all these new user accounts we're creating.
You're absolutely right. Security is paramount. And while the guide doesn't delve into every detail, it's something we should definitely be thinking about.
So what else should we be doing? What are we missing?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is multi-factor authentication.
Multi-factor authentication. Okay, break that down for me.
It's basically an extra layer of security that requires users to verify their identity in multiple ways. So it's not just their password. They might also need, like, a code sent to their phone or something.
Oh, right. I've seen that before.
Yeah, it's becoming pretty standard practice.
So even if the guide doesn't explicitly mention it, it's something we should be looking into as part of our onboarding process.
For sure. It's a small step that can have a big impact on keeping your organization's data secure.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into adding users to Microsoft 365. We've covered a lot of ground today. Hopefully everyone listening feels a bit more prepared to tackle this process.
And maybe even a little bit excited to welcome those new teammates.
Right. It doesn't have to be a daunting task. With a little bit of planning and the right tools, it can be, well, manageable.
Here's to smooth and secure onboarding.
Cheers to that. Thanks everyone for joining us on another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.